Je me permets de m'exprimer en anglais, mais juste pour souligner que je m'exprime dans ma qualité de président de Pro-Europa et non celle de fonctionnaire à la Commission européenne, dont, comme a déjà dit Pat Cox, les Britanniques sont très peu nombreux et surtout dans la fourchette jeune de la Commission. On a très peu de fonctionnaires britanniques jeunes. Il y a moins de 5 qui ont moins de 45 ans à la Commission. Bon, je reviens à l'anglais. So, just to say, I'm the president of Pro-Europa. This is a Brussels-based organization, essentially not only made up of British, both from the private and public sectors, and businesses whose bottom line very much depends on being fully engaged in the European Union. In Pro-Europa, we all agree on the fact, and I think everybody here on the panel would agree on the fact that Britain should retain its influence in the world, but we differ hugely on the how. In Pro-Europa, we believe that the European Union serves as a multiplier of British power and doesn't subtract from it. We think that we know that the European Union doesn't stop powers from trading. Look at Germany on a global scale. And we know that the large member states do wield a lot of power and influence. We also know that reforms are ongoing in the European Commission as we speak. Look at the mission letters of Jean-Claude Juncker, the president, to his commissioners, requiring them to engage actively with national parliaments. So we believe that British interests are best served at the heart of Europe, because we feel that being at the heart of Europe, it's the best way to seek to control our futures. I say very carefully to seek to control our futures, because the world has changed a lot, and a lot since I was born, and a lot since I started working nearly some 20 years ago. Because it is a fact that the powers of individual governments in a globalized world have hugely diminished. And I'm just going to step into my day job, as it were, and give you perhaps one of the reasons why. One of the reasons why is the digital revolution. The digital revolution is bringing fundamental seismic changes to society and the economic structures of the world we live in today. And what is so very different about the digital revolution is that it affects the whole value chain, not just the workers in the cotton factories at the time of John Ludd. What is very different is that it is hitting for the very first time the middle class. Retail bankers, secretaries, clerks, travel agents, even basic functions of lawyers and accountants. They're all here now. They're in a smartphone. These used to be jobs done by people. Now they're done by apps, programs, software that replace people. This squeezing of the middle classes, squeezing of wages, as technology has increasingly taken over, and please don't get me wrong, I'm very much in favor of technological advances, but we must confront this fact. You only need to go to Paris or Italy or Milan and see the strikes on the streets and the protests against Uber and other such things. These changes are profound, and they're certainly contributing to a climate of fear and insecurity, not just in Great Britain, but all over Europe. But somehow we can't quite put our finger on it. And I never hear politicians talk about this question in Britain. And sometimes I think it's easier to blame the economic migrants from Eastern Europe than it is to address some of the fundamental problems in our globalized world. I would suggest you can do whatever you want to restrict the flow of migrants from Eastern Europe, but there's very little you can do to prevent what is arguably one of the biggest threats to the structures of the economy as we know it today. It is software, it is apps, it is microchips that are replacing jobs formerly performed by humans. And if you really want to stop this kind of huge migration, which is the microchip, if you don't believe me, just go into any bank on the high street in Britain and see how many employees there are as compared to bank machines. The only way you can do this is to switch off the internet, which would be ridiculous. Paradoxically, the UK is wholeheartedly embracing the technological migrants of the digital revolution. I just thought that was very important to set this context of the modern age. And I think I just want to come back for this and try and answer this question of what we might lose if we withdrew from the European Union. Before I came to Europe, as it were, and joined the Commission, like Martin, I was a lawyer, and I worked for one of the largest and most successful law firms in the world. And we poured, and we still pour, millions of pounds into the UK exchequer in the forms of taxation. And these fortunes were built in large part on the solid foundations of EU rules on free movement and freedom of establishment. So I wonder what would happen to those revenues. Where would the government get all those revenues from if we were totally out of the EU, if the professional services sector, which is the strongest in the UK, were blocked from operating in Europe in the single market, if we were right out? And I want to go on about those restrictions as well. Do we have an arrangement like Norway or even Switzerland in EEA or EFTA? Well, you'd still have to apply all the rules and regulation, all of them, except that you have no say whatsoever in how they're put together. And speaking from an insider perspective, Great Britain has a phenomenal amount of influence in the crafting of rules in the European Union. We might even have a Swiss arrangement where you're not in the single market for financial services. No comment for the City of London. But if we are out of the single market, if EU law is not supreme, then any country would be fully entitled to block or ban a service or a good to protect its own market from entering that market. So British beef would be blocked in France. Security burglary alarm systems in Belgium would similarly be blocked. I'm quoting there from famous European case law, because the law would not be upheld, or rather not be upheld, in favor of Britain. I just want to recount to you a personal conversation I had with my parents over dinner some time ago. My parents are ardent conservatives, but they are both very pro-European, and they're both medical professionals. My father was what one calls a consultant in the National Health Service, a medical specialist. And he told me that any consultant requires around 15 people doing the lowly tasks of dare I say it, clearing up the blood, the urine, all these things that happen with operations, wheeling people in and out of the theatre. And my mother once remarked, well, I wonder if Nigel Farage actually fell down the stairs, broke his legs, God forbid, and his bedpan had to be changed by a Bulgarian migrant. Question. But to conclude, I feel, and we feel in Pro-Europa, that Britain would be far better off. It would be a richer place. It would be a more diverse place. It would be a more progressive place if we stayed within the European Union. It is essential that we maintain this two-way street of goods and services and this constant traffic of humans. And I say not human trafficking, because human trafficking is one of those examples facing Britain that it can only seek to address where it acts as a bloc in collaboration with its partners in this complex globalized world than if it seeks to act alone. And that, I say, is our strength. It's our strength in numbers. And just one final thought, how would Britain look, I think, if we're outside the European Union? Just before I left our hotel, there are copies of Mark Rothko. And I don't know if you're familiar with the art of Mark Rothko. but these are these doom-laden orange squares that point to an affinity and a very unknown and rather sticky end. And I think the Mark Rothko pictures are probably a very fitting image of the future of Britain if we're outside the European Union. Thank you very much.